we really want people to kind of feel that ownership. And so it's more walking the walk. So we'll use the terms, of course, but ultimately, I want them to truly feel ownership. With ownership comes accountability. And I'm, me and other of our exec team are here to help everybody kind of try to get through the roadblocks, get creative on problem solving. But ultimately, you've got to deliver.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow? Our interview today is with David Coppins, a co-founder at Intelycare. We talk about the importance of tenacity. We talk about what really tenacity is across the organization and how do you bring it out in others. It's natural for it to be a part of the leadership team, but how do you bring it out across that organization to drive the business forward? Well, that's the core of today's conversation. When you think about your own leadership, are you evolving the way you want to be? Are you really taking your own leadership to the next level? Well, my job is to help CEOs and their teams go to that next level, continue growing. If you want to have a free coaching session with me, just go to genehammett.com. You can see Try Coaching, see what it's about, see if it's a good fit for you. And if you are a good fit, then it's absolutely free for you to get free coaching from me, Gene Hammett. Just go to genehammett.com. You can get that right now. Now here's the interview with David. David, how are you?
Good, Gene. Thanks.
Excited to have you here on the podcast to talk about leadership, culture, and what makes companies grow fast. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about Intelycare.
Great. Yeah, sure. Intelycare is a two-sided marketplace where we put together thousands of nurses on one side and healthcare facilities on the other that need their shifts filled on a temporary basis. So on a shift-by-shift basis, you've got 15,000 nurses and nurse assistants that are all on their app scouring opportunities for them to pick up gig work, side work, extra shifts. And then you've got all these healthcare facilities that are chronically understaffed that are using our services to help them fill that. And we use a ton of data science for matching purposes and so on, but ultimately it ends up with a pretty extraordinary opportunity for both sides of the market.
So through all this COVID stuff, you've had to see an uptick in business, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was a significant increase in demand. And although supply has been really tough to provide, a lot of nurses and CNAs found it very difficult to work during this time, but overall, definitely.
Well, one of the things that we wanted to talk about today is growth. And just to put that in context, you were number 41 on the Inc. list, first time, over 7,000% growth in a 3-year period. Most people believe that's kind of impossible. How do you think you got to 7,000% growth?
Well, the first year was an extraordinary year for us. Our product and the service that we were offering just really struck a nerve and immediately just took off like crazy. And so it was really kind of our first year, or rather the second year, the full year, calendar year that really mattered, that made a big difference. We went from $500,000 in revenue in our first year to $11 million in our second year. And it made a massive difference, just immediately kind of struck.
Well, David, I wanted to dive into what caused that growth. And one of the things that we have talked about researching your company is the tenacity to overcome challenges. Tenacity is kind of a $10 word. So how would you explain what tenacity is for those listening in?
Yeah, it's a great, to me, you could talk about determination, you can talk about persistence, but to be tenacious, to have that tenacity, it really is a true kind of won't let fail mentality. And I got to say, our co-founders and I, we kind of built it on this, but we couldn't have articulated it. That was what was really driving us in the early days of the company. We were good working together, but it wasn't until a couple of years looking back, realizing it was the tenacity that really pulled us.
So that's usually found at that founder level. So you had a co-founder in this. I would imagine this is something that has been important to carry through the entire organization. So how actually do you encourage people to be more tenacious?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And as you get bigger, that it's harder for just that natural culture of the way we approach problem solving to become, part of the infrastructure or part of the day-to-day. I think, first of all, when we talk about our values, we do talk about engineering success. And I don't think that term, and we use that term, I don't think it fully describes what we mean when we say it. I think the essence of it is just causing success or designing it, or rather making it or forcing something to be successful, actually forcing it. And this is where I think that it made a big difference. So if you were to really kind of break it down, I think there are kind of three things that we do consistently, and that we make sure that the whole teams, the entire team. We have 120 employees now that are that are trained, and culturally this is the way we operate. First, plan for things to go wrong. We always say, everybody always says expect the best, plan for the worst, but you really got to do it. You got to anticipate that that things are going to go wrong, and you got to get ahead of it. Second, I think you start with optimism when faced with a problem. One of my co-founders, Ike Na, I got to credit him for his positive outlook in effectively every situation. I swear that guy has never had a bad day in his life. Every time we're faced with something, a big problem, or even something that looks truly insurmountable, the guy's like, we can figure it out. We can figure it out. And with that optimism, it really gives everyone around him the confidence to find solutions. If he believes that, in the leadership believes that you can do it, then the fear sort of melts away, and the ability to kind of really let the creativity flow is what kind of gets us to this solution. And then third, you got to throw out all the preconceived ideas of what business can do and can't do to solve problems. You got to get creative, and you got to be willing to do some hard work. You're going to get something, and there's some funny stories.
Now, hold on for a second. David just talked about as culture gets bigger, it gets harder. Here's the reality, that a lot of people think culture is something that just naturally progressive and it kind of goes where it goes. But you've got to be intentional about the culture. You've got to be working on it and shaping it. As you add new team members, the culture kind of changes. As you acquire new companies, it certainly changes. And so one of the things that you want to do as a visionary leader is be intentional about the culture that is necessary for you to achieve the goals. What's really necessary for you and how you engage with each other. Now, your job is to make sure that it continues to stay on the right path. That doesn't mean you have to be the day in and day out culture czar, if you will. And actually, part of the interviews we've done here, people actually have culture committees, but you want to make sure that you've got your eye on how people are working together and the energy and the vibe that's going through the culture. Now, back to the interview with David. When you think about tenacity, what would we see in your organization that would demonstrate tenacity across the company?
So I think that in the early days, for example, customer relationships are very tenuous. They'll give you a try, but ultimately you got to deliver, or they'll just move on. Right? You're off with you. So I think that the types of things that are really vital and that you see in the organization is just the fact that you can't be a micromanager. I'm not a micromanager, and what you need to make sure we do is you really have to help make sure that everybody's got clarity on what the vision is. What are the objectives? What are we really trying to accomplish? And get into it. Get real detail. Get to some context around that too. And I love doing this. So my senior execs are awesome. And they do things better than I would do them when given a lot of creativity and given a lot of freedom to explore. So first thing is, everybody really has to make sure that you're clear on what the objective is, the big vision. What are we trying to get to? right, guys? And then how we get there, that's really up to you guys. And I love being able to kind of coach people in that way, and then let them run with it. Let them kind of come up with some creative, amazing solutions. And then they tap into their people, and the same thing happens.
What you're describing there, I typically say the word empowerment.
Absolutely, sure.
And I know this is common across a lot of fast growth companies.
The aspect of it, sure. The beginning part of successful tenacity is starting with empowerment.
Beautiful. You had mentioned some stories. What's one that comes to mind that really demonstrates this tenacity?
Well, so as I mentioned in the early days, customer relationships are pretty tenuous. And we were trying to make sure that every client, when they presented us with an opportunity to fill a shift, that we would absolutely do 100%. We were there for them. And we had one of our healthcare facilities had a shift 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And one of our nurses that had accepted that shift had to call up. A kid was sick or something, couldn't do it. So Ike, our CTO co-founder, gets on the phone. It's 10 o'clock at night. He's on the phone with all sorts of nurses trying to get them to kind of backfill, pick up that shift. And finally, he gets a nurse that says, "Well, I could do it, but I don't have a babysitter. I've got my kids here." And Ike says, "Well, how many kids do you have?" "I have two, and these are their ages." He says, "Well, so do I. I've got kids the same age. Why don't I babysit your kids?" Now, this nurse has never met Ike, right? Never, and they're on the phone, but he's trying to convince this nurse and say, "Look, if you take the shift, I'll take care of your kids. They can come to my house, sleep overnight, and I'll take the shift." Sure enough, she says, "Okay, I'll do it." And so he goes over, picks up the kids, takes them to his house. They just never met, the other guys, but they just slept over. And then the next morning, delivered the kids back, and she was able to fill the shift. But the client was happy. And this is part of that tenaciousness. You have to do things. You have to force success, engineer the success. And too often I hear other co-founders or other founders of companies, and I don't know if this is just across the board or very much a Silicon Valley thing, or I don't know, but they often talk about the business as if it's a third-party entity. And especially they kind of get to that point when the business, either they're about to shut down, or they blew through all the money and they need to kind of pivot or something. But it's as if the idea failed, they didn't fail. And I got to tell you, that's not how I'm wired. I don't know if maybe I should take a look at it that way, but I really feel like if the customer need is there, you can figure out how to serve that need and make a business around it, make a business successful with it. And so anyway, that's part of the tenacity.
Let's take a break. I want to make sure that you know that we have a YouTube channel where Growth Think Tank publishes these interviews. If you like to watch video instead, you can go ahead and go to YouTube, search in Growth Think Tank, or search in any guest that we have on the show, and you will be able to find them with an interview with me and them. There's other special content in there as well. We'd love for you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Just do that now. David, when you are, encouraging and leading your employees, how do you encourage them to have that tenacity even when it's hard?
Well, I think part of it is, as I said, start with the empowerment. But then if they come back with, "I have no solution," then you jump in. You jump in with the brainstorming, and you start asking all sorts of questions, and you can quickly help them expand their thinking. I think they're failing in the third element, which is the preconceived ideas of what businesses can and can't do. So if you help them, start to just expand their thinking. How can we actually do this? And everybody operates within guardrails. Sometimes people operate within really narrow guardrails, and I want to try to open that up. So that's what we kind of continue to coach people to do, is expand their thinking, and then we can kind of get to a great.
You said the word coaching, and me being an executive coach, and I know there's some real overlap between you coaching a director or someone on your senior leadership team. When you say that, do you really think about the coaching process, or do you just call it coaching?
Gene, I don't know what the coaching process really is. It's to me, it's training. Somebody who maybe doesn't have all the miles on them like I do, but I do like to think of it as coaching, because again, if they're empowered to make decisions and to be provided with the resources to accomplish their goal, then I like to see them act a little more autonomously or independently, and therefore I see myself more as a coach than necessarily directing what needs to get done precisely. Again, my direction kind of stops with, this is the objective, and here are your resources. So go forth and conquer. But
some of the things that you've been dancing around, David, have led me to think about, you really want your employees to feel a sense of ownership across the company. Is that something you guys talk about, this feeling of ownership?
Glad you put it that way. Sometimes we do talk about it that way, but that is and sometimes, just saying that is one of those nice key phrases that people like to throw around. We really mean it. We really want people to feel that ownership. And so it's more walking the walk. So we'll use the terms, of course, but ultimately I want them to truly feel ownership. With ownership comes accountability. And I'm, me and other of our exec team are here to help everybody kind of try to get through the roadblocks, get creative on problem solving. But ultimately, you've got to deliver.
Now, hold on for a second. David just talked about the feeling of ownership. Now, have you thought about this feeling of ownership across your company? Well, what it's not is everyone having a financial stake. That is helpful, but you don't have to have a financial stake to feel ownership. But when you lead people to have this feeling of ownership, you truly are empowering them. You're including them in decisions. You're helping them transform themselves. You're really helping them connect to the work the way they've never connected to before. When you feel like an owner, you approach things differently, more creatively, innovation, and of course, tenacity. When you think about this, I want to make sure that you continue that job as a leader, is to, how do you engineer this feeling of ownership? How are you intentional about it? My job is to create content, because a lot of the focus of fast growth companies is about this feeling of ownership. My next book is about how do you create and lead differently with this feeling of ownership. Now, I want to give you some insight today about why it's important. If you want to find more details, just go to genehammett.com. You can find some details about some of the other interviews I've done about this feeling of ownership and how important it is in fast growth. Now back to the interview. I want to switch gears for us a little bit here. One of the other elements that you have kind of shared with me about what makes your company grow so fast is you have a level of openness. And maybe this is across the company, or maybe it's at executive levels. What is openness to you as it relates to growing your company?
Yeah, so I made a mistake early on. We were trying to hire in, so we had our 4 co-founders, and we all divided up responsibilities, and we were doing some great things. We hired in some junior folks, and that was all still working well. But then when we started to fill out more of that senior leadership team, we had hired 3 different people in, and I was not working to really test for the cultural fit, or rather, I just assumed everybody had the same intent, and so I was looking more about their experience background, and being that we were so small and not even yet venture funded, that it was I was just excited that people are accepting the job, right? So we ended up with 3 people that had big company mentalities, that you have to define your own agenda. You put gag orders on all the people that work for you, so that any presentation about your department all funneled through that one leader, and that they could position the good and the bad together, or whatever, in the way that they wanted to sell it to me. And I'm like, guys, we're 45 people. What are you doing? let's just all talk open and like what are the problems we're trying to solve? What's really happening? What are the good things that are happening? And from that time forward, that became my number one hiring criteria, was making sure that that culturally that they were very focused on being low ego, big open organization. I was very fortunate to bring in president and COO for our company. He'd been a former CEO, but right away we hit it off. Again, low ego guy, and that was exactly what I was trying to bring in. And we reset the stage, and was able to kind of now fill out the entire executive staff, where we're all just open and honest with each other. If something gets screwed up pretty massively, it's okay. Let's just work on the solutions. Let's work on the solutions. If once we get past the solutions, let's make sure we do a retro and see what could have been done better, and let's make sure that we engineer that same mistake can't happen again. But don't hide it. You know, we're all in this together.
I want to give you one last question here, David. You mentioned ego. Ego often gets in the way of great leadership. What have you seen as an example to that?
You know, I think, well, I'm sure there's countless case studies in typical tech world of big egos. You know, nobody wants to talk about WeWork these days, but you know, there's probably plenty of good case studies. I think, to me, I don't know. I've personally been just very averse to these massive ego organizations. I spent 2 years working in private equity, something that kind of a lot of B-school kids kind of really aspire to, and I was thrilled to kind of have gotten the job. And after 2 years, I just couldn't stand the I'm the smartest guy in the room kind of mentality when there's these companies that are doing amazing things and management teams that are doing extraordinary. To me, I just get excited about the ideas. You know, I just get excited about making change, making something that really solves the customer problem. And if you can really do that, then you've got this awesome, exciting thing that you can build with other people. So, you know, personally, I just have a personal aversion to big ego people, and maybe, you know, ego has some place, right? You know, you want your sales organization to be very self-confident. You want them to kind of continue to grow, but you just can't build a great. I don't think you can build a great company, or at least in my mind, you have the opportunity to build a great company with. I think that's possible.
David, thanks for being here on the show, sharing your wisdom on leadership and growth. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Gene. Take care.
What a great interview. I love talking about different topics on this. I haven't talked about tenacity before, but it is necessary if you want to have employees navigate through the challenges that are in front of them. We all have challenges in our business. You want to make sure your employees are a good fit for the job. When you think about your own leadership, make sure you're continuing to grow and evolve. My job here is to create content for you as a leader to grow beyond what you believe is possible. My job as an executive coach is to help you with the fine details, the blind spots that really keep you from growing where you want to be. If you want to find out more about me, just go to genehammett.com. When you think about growth and you think about leadership, think of Growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. I'll see you next time.